Let's see those fires as soon as they happen. Let's get first responders out there to knock the fires down. Now bad days don't become catastrophic days.
Scott, generally speaking, how high a priority are investments in grid resilience?
They're incredibly high. If you think about the energy grid of North America, it is critical to national security, critical to the economic competitiveness of our nation. And so we have no choice but to be both reliable in blue sky days, but also resilient when bad things happen. And when I think of bad things that can happen to the grid, certainly it's storms and fires and earthquakes, acts of God, but also acts of war, things like cyber threats, physical threats. We are seeing more and more targeting of critical infrastructure all over the globe. And so it's our responsibility to not just be able to keep that system operational on blue sky days, but to be resilient when something bad happens. So we take that responsibility extremely seriously. And in the investments in grid resilience are one of our top priorities.
Now, coming off 3 major hurricanes in recent months, how did recent investments in grid hardening perform? Tell me, what lessons were learned?
Every one of these incidents is an opportunity to learn. I would say the grid performed really effectively. Now, the people who are without power for extended periods of time, it is always difficult to be without electricity. We know that, so we strive to get power back on as quickly as possible. In places where you had serious investments in resilience, you saw restoration times be much quicker. So we're down here in Florida right now. Florida has invested billions of dollars over the last 2 decades in storm hardening, things like hardened pole infrastructure, undergrounding where it makes sense, more flood monitoring, smart meters, things like that. In those instances, we were able to restore power to most customers within 5 days. In places like Western North Carolina, upstate South Carolina, areas that are not traditionally hit by things like hurricanes, it took a little bit longer, and in some cases, we are rebuilding that infrastructure. So understanding the difference between an emergency restoration, get the power back on as quickly as possible so people can get back to their lives, versus investing in that rebuild to have to redevelop an entire piece of infrastructure. That's the story that we tell all the time, so that, hey, let's spend the money on the front end so that we have less impact on the back end.
What other risks are companies working to mitigate?
We've got acts of war and acts of God. I think in particular, we are seeing a lot of investment in wildfire risk mitigation. This is not just a Western problem anymore. We are seeing wildfires all over the country. My home state of New Jersey has seen fires just this year. We've seen them in places like the bayous of Louisiana. So what we're doing is to invest in grid hardening against wildfires. A couple of really interesting stories. Undergrounding, where it makes sense, prevents sparks from happening. We are seeing, again, more things like ground fault interrupters, which when something makes contact with the line, now it doesn't spark, now it doesn't create a fire. We're also deploying things like sensor networks and cameras bolstered with things like artificial intelligence, so that when a fire happens, whether it's because of electric infrastructure, by the way, fewer than 10% of all fires are caused by electric infrastructure. Most of them are people doing dumb things or lightning strikes. Let's see those fires as soon as they happen. Let's get first responders out there to knock the fires down. Now bad days don't become catastrophic days. These are the kinds of things that grid infrastructure can help with, not just preventing bad things from happening, but being responsive when they do.
Scott, it's been wonderful to talk with you.
And you, thanks so much.
Thank you for joining me.
My pleasure.